Purpose Publishing Incorporated, together with Talent Outreach for Underprivileged Career Hunters, Touch Incorporated, together with East Cleveland Music Distribution and Motion Pictures, present the Honorable Assemblyman William D. Payne.
Assemblyman William Payne is as important to American history as Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. This legislation he passed, New Jersey is the first state in this country to pass such a law. Right now I want to introduce to you all, without further ado, the great Assemblyman William Payne. I had the pleasure of meeting a year ago. If you'll come up and just a few words, Assemblyman Payne, please stand up and give me.
I want to again thank Mr. Mapp for being responsible for me being in Houston this weekend. I was not at all planning to come to Houston for the Super Bowl. It's not one of my major things that I'm interested in, and I was not coming here. However, when he mentioned to me that he thought this legislation that he heard about, he read about it somewhere. I think he said someone read about it in Jet magazine, and then a friend of his, associate, and then called Ray and told him about this legislation, and they, for some reason, got extremely excited about it, and visited me in my office last June, as a matter of fact, and came into my office and were excited about this possibility, this legislation, and he said, thank God that somebody has taken an initiative to introduce something like this that would be able to incorporate our contributions into the regular mainstream history of this country. That for too long, what we have done, the contributions that we have made, have been kept on the shelf, on the side somewhere. And except those who were born in the South were very fortunate, who had black teachers during segregation. The black teachers taught about black history. They taught about it. So a lot of my friends who came up from the South, I envied because they knew about some of these things. But when I was growing up in the city of Newark, a predominantly white neighborhood in the North Ward of Newark, I was one of the few young black kids in my class. And the first literature I heard about was Little Black Sambo. As a little boy in the kindergarten, the first piece of literature that the teacher read was Little Black Sambo. And here I was, Bill Payne, sitting in the classroom with all white kids, and they all looked around and pointed and laughed and whatnot. And then as you went through the history, went through our school, the next grades, we talked about Nathan Hale and Patrick Henry. We talked about Paul Revere, and that the Revolutionary War was starting, and that the whites Paul Revere rode through town saying the redcoats are coming, the redcoats are coming, and they talked about the Minutemen, and they talked about all these great things. They talked about Nathan Hale and Patrick Henry. They did not teach me that the very first person killed when the redcoats came was a black man like me. They didn't teach me that. They left it out of the history books. They didn't tell me that Crispus Attucks was the very first one killed. They did not teach me either that during the Revolutionary War, over 5,000 blacks fought in the Revolutionary War. 5,000 with the British and 5,000 with the Americans, because the British promised the blacks that they'd be free if we won, all right? They didn't teach me that. So therefore, you grow up with this view of white. Everything that was done was by whites, okay? So, and throughout history, the same thing. I mean, we fought in all the wars. The First World War came along. They talked about a guy by the name of Sergeant York. There was a movie made by Sergeant York. Oh my God, the bravest man in the war. Made a big movie about him. Well, in my neighborhood, there was a man by the name of Needham Roberts, Mr. Roberts, who was a private in the First World War, and he and Private Johnson from New York captured a whole battalion or whatever of Germans by themselves. That wasn't written about anywhere. So therefore, you hear about that war, and it had to be white folks that did it, all right? Blacks had nothing to do with it. The fact is that we were right there, and in fact, every war that this country has ever had, we have been there from the very, very beginning. The red in that flag represents the blood that we have spilled as well, but our children are not being taught that, and so white kids grow up thinking that it's all there, that they did it all. The Civil War came along. I didn't know that over 200,000 blacks fought in the Civil War, because what they showed me in our books was a group of black folks standing in front of a rundown cabin with ragged clothes on, and the Union Army, all white, marching off to free us. The fact is that we fought in that war as well. But if you teach children from the beginning about Black Sambo, and you teach them to leave them out of history, then the black kids, of course, are going to grow up with a feeling of nothingness, of inferiority. And this doesn't belong to me. Why should I do anything? Why should I protect this street? Why should I do anything? This is not mine. It's all theirs, you see? So I realized that we had to do something about it. But at that time, growing up, I felt inferior. I felt like a second-class citizen. I was colored. I was a Negro. There was nothing positive we did, all right? Nothing. So, you know, Second World War was winding down, and soldiers started coming home from the war, and I was a young fella. Our mother passed away at a very young age, and my mother and father my father was young, and they weren't able. My grandmother said, Wooly, my father, who was 30 years old, that we're going to take the children, we're going to buy a house and so on and so on. So we went to live with my grandmother. My mother was 30 when she passed away, and Donna was 8, and I was 10. And we delivered newspapers. We started working. We started delivering the newspapers. And it was during that time that as I delivered my newspapers, I used to read the stories, you know, the headlines and whatnot, and I became aware of things going on around the world. But I began reading about soldiers coming home from the Second World War in uniform. Black soldiers that just fought in the hot sands of Africa, had fought in Normandy, etc., had fought to make this a free country and protect liberties, had rescued some of the people in the camps, concentration camps. Blacks also were there. They were among the first to rescue these people who were victims of the Holocaust. But when they came back here in uniform, many times they got on a bus to go back home. And when they got to the Mason-Dixon line, they were told to get in the back of the bus. That they were just fought for freedom around the world. Get in the back of the bus. And then if they wanted to get something to eat, they told them to go around the back. Or if they got uppity, they lynched them. Oh yes. Some blacks were lynched in uniform after that war. And so I felt, my God, this is terrible. This is absolutely terrible. But one day, the United Nations was established, and there was a man by the name of Count Bernadotte. Count Bernadotte was a peace negotiator, worked for the United Nations. He was from Sweden. There was the war, you know, this war that's going on in the Middle East now is nothing new. It's been going on for 1,000 years. But anyway, there was a war back then, and I think it was 47, and they sent Count Bernadotte over there to try to mediate the peace, to bring peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis, right? Well, he got killed. He got killed, and then there was no one else left around, except that there was this black man who was there at the United Nations, who was Ralph Bunche, Dr. Bunche. And they looked and said, well, we'll have to send him. And they sent Dr. Bunche over to the Middle East, and he brought peace. He mediated the peace. That's why Dr. Bunche won the Nobel Peace Prize, because he brought peace to that region of the world. Well, I read about this colored man, this Negro, a person like me, a person, and I'm saying to myself, as a colored man in this country, there's nothing that I'll ever achieve, except when I read about Ralph Bunche, I said, if he can rise to the heights, international heights like this, so could I. And it was at that time I had an epiphany. At 16 years of age, all the chains of inferiority and that second class dropped away from me, and I knew that I was as good as any man that walks this earth.